It's a pleasure to be here today and take part of this very exciting data and analytics event. I think most of us in here, I would count 150 to 200 tops, everyone would agree that data and analytics is more important than ever when it comes to aiding us in making the decisions in our business. Now, this will only increase further as the digitalization spreads across the industries and into every corner of our organization, which means that we will have to deal with more data, both structured and unstructured, and for that we need more sophisticated algorithms and predictive models to aid us along the way. Machine learning will evolve. AI will not just support us in making the right decision, it will make the decisions on our behalf and in real time. And if you're trying to get over here, automation, robotics, and you're struggling with the hygiene factors, which might be data quality, data integrity, or understanding even how you operate your business processes, what's the value you're trying to add? So if you don't understand the cash drivers, the value drivers in your processes, and if you're not in control of your data, how would you succeed to get over here? This might seem far-fetched. It might feel like trying to reach for the stars. So I will today here give you our story and our journey to how we at Hoist Finance accelerate business transformation through data and analytics. Before jumping into the Hoist specifics, I want to just bring up some more general questions that I think affects all of us in the data and analytics field. So, technology is everywhere around us today, right? It's accessible, it's easy to use, it's cheaper, it's in our pockets every day, and that generates a lot of more data. So, data and analytics is everywhere in society, and it's everywhere in our organizations. Now, this might challenge the way we are structured in our organizations and our enterprises. So how do we build a perfect digital enterprise where we can use data analytics throughout the organizations? What are the roles and responsibilities that you as an analyst has? What is the roles and responsibilities of everyone in the organization with regards to data and analytics? Those are very important questions and that I think are very crucial for succeeding in the new digital enterprise. So apart from that, we in the analytics field, we of course also need to go from a grinder to an enabler. So what do I mean with that? We need to go from control to trust. We need to offer good self-service to our users. They need to access the data at the right time. We need to do so without getting anarchy, right? We need to have the ability to audit. We need to understand who used what data at what time, especially if you guys are like me in the financial industry or any other regulated industry. So how do you manage that? And then we have the lovely hype that we are all living in. Gartner is quite nicely illustrate this with a hype cycle. Some of you might be familiar with the hype cycle. I would guess most of you are. So it shows on one scale time and then the expectations on the other. And it quite nicely illustrates by the peak where we have the most inflated expectations. And that place is getting very crowded. And these expectations might hit you in different ways as you move forward. So you might have your business executive in the marketing department who thinks big data solves everything and goes and buy Hadoop and puts it in his organization. You might have your COO who wants to automate his production processes and he goes and buys an RPA solution from Automation Anywhere or Blue Prism. And so it goes on and on, right? Quite familiar, I would guess, to some of you. Now, if we go back to ourselves, whether we are running an analytics department or if we are partaking in this evolution, it's very easy to go into the sea of tech especially if we're struggling to get the why and what we're trying to solve in place. If we don't really understand where we're heading, to make some progress, it's easy to start with the how. But if we start with the how, we might build the perfect island in a sea of waste. So we might be sub-optimizing. So now going back to the Hoist journey, I want to tell you a little bit how we approach the why, the what, and the how. And to start off with, I want to tell you, who doesn't know about Hoist Finance, what we actually do. Hoist Finance is a trusted debt restructuring partner to international banks and financial institutions. We are specialized in servicing non-performing loan and help customers become debt-free. To help individuals to become debt-free is our way of helping them to get back into the financial ecosystem and to get back on their feet. This strategy is something that we are very proud of and that has been proven to be very successful throughout the years. We have shown tremendous growth. We are now today present in 11 jurisdictions. We are listed on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange here in Stockholm, and our strategy is to continue to grow. To be able to continue to grow, we need to have a flexible and agile back end that scales over time. So taking all those challenges, questions into consideration, and also putting them in the middle of an industry in motion, where you have increased regulations, increased competition by new players entering the market. So how do you approach all this? Where do you start? And at Hoist Finance, our decisive answer is called REACH. REACH is our management methodology, our methodology to approach operational excellence. And for those of you who are accustomed with the voice of the customer concept, and those of you who know Lean Six Sigma, that's the fundament of everything. So we are starting at trying to ask ourselves the question, what is the value added to the customers in everything we do? We're taking the outside-in perspective. Now, looking at the surrounding pillars, the core of the system is composed of process, performance, and change management. I will explain a little bit more later how we operationalize the process and the performance, because this is where the magic with the data happens in between. So we of course, look at the business from a process perspective. We standardize our processes, and we optimize our processes by using data and analytics to measure performance and identify improvements. Not rocket science, but a hygiene factor. Additionally, we have the change parts. The change part is how we make everything we do stick over time, by involving the people who work in the processes out in the different jurisdictions to ensure that they are taking part in this journey and take accountability for the improvements that we are putting out in the business. Now, this should become a self-playing piano at the end. We need to do this continuously and building improvements as we move forward. And the whole concept is to do incremental small improvements so that we over time see the big benefits. Think about it. If you improve your business 1% or your process 1% per day, it takes you 67 days to improve 100%. Around this, we have the technologies. The technology helps us to accelerate this change at a higher pace. This helps us to speed up the process of optimizing our processes. So we do inner transformation from within, accelerated by technology. All right, so we have a strategy, an approach. How do we structure ourselves around this strategy? So coming back to the organizational questions, in the group analytics department, we have in the center the operational excellence team. This is where we have the Lean Six Sigma experts, the change agents, the functional analysts, those who are closest to the business. On the right-hand side of me, that is, we have the analytics and the insight team. These are the data scientists, whatever you now define a data scientist as, but for us, it's the ones who build the predictive models, those who create the insight, segment and mine the data. On the other side, we have the information and the BI delivery organization. This is what we call traditional BI, right? This is where we ensure we have the data quality, the data integrity. This is where we roll out the dashboard solutions that serves the vast majority of our business. And the further and the more digital we become in our industries, because you have to remember the financial industry, which being a service industry, is undergoing, as many of you might know, even an increased digitalization. So the further we digitalize our processes and automate our processes, the more dependent we become about this organization to understand through data where to do the improvements. So there is a increasing dependency between these teams. So that's the people aspect. Now, how do we operationalize this strategy? I will show you an example. So we start off with the business processes, as I described. The business processes, if you haven't defined them, that's the first thing you do. You understand what are the value drivers, what are the cash drivers, you document them, you define what is the as-is, and what is the future state that you need to go to reach the target, if that is 30% efficiency gains and higher quality output, whatever that might be, depending on what industry you're in. Now, to steer and measure this over time and to ensure changes stick, you obviously need to get the data mapping and the information and governance in place. You need to understand the data points that are the determinants in the data jungle that you're in. And I'm not talking about big data, I'm talking about all the data that your processes, and machines, and people generate on a day-to-day basis. This is a hygiene factor. It's easier said than done, especially if your landscape is more complex, if your organization is spread across all corners of the world, the source systems are all looking different. Of course, this is a challenge, but it's an important one that you need to do and need to prepare for the future. Now, obviously, you need to apply this data in somehow. And this is where we apply it on our analytical platform. I'm going to come into this a bit further down the road here. But this is where we keep our defined KPIs. This is where we have our self-service platform, where we mine the data and blend it with other sources to, based on aggregated information, drive business improvements. Now, this is where the operational excellence guys, excuse me, comes back into the picture again to, based on this data, then drive the improvements in collaboration, again, with the people who are working in the processes. This makes these changes stick over time. An important aspect that is often underestimated is the facilitation part. So what do I mean with facilitation in this sense? Well, the more data-driven we become, the more, let's say, expectations we have on our co-workers and employees out in the different departments to be able to interpret and understand data. So if my number of calls goes down from 6,000 to 5,000 per day, what does it mean? Maybe that was an easy example, but the more advanced we get, the more requirements it puts on our staff to be able to cope with this and understand it. So we teach them how to manage with objectives, manage by facts, and do the storytelling with the data. So this is the fundamental process that we are building everything upon. On top of that, of course, when you take the next step, the future steps, you might add the machine learning to even increase and learn by itself by observing the improvements that you are undertaking and actually improve, if it's RPA you're doing, the processes itself. Or improve the way of making the decisions and making them on our behalf with AI. So this is our structure. Underneath, of course, we have a technology stack. And I will not go into detail about the technology stack. I will put a bit of focus on the three interactions with our end users, our analysts, and our data stewards. So coming back to the starting point, the hygiene factors. If we are to do proper analysis and if we are to trust the data that we are using, we need to have proper control of our data out in the jurisdictions and our source system. So we are appointing data stewards who owns the data and information model within their business unit, within their jurisdiction, to be able to validate and ensure that our data is consistent in terms of definitions over time. They are also responsible, of course, for things such as master data and so on and so forth. So this is a super important part of making this a success. On the bottom corner, you have our analysts and power users. These are the ones that are using our analytical self-service platform, which is running on Alteryx. And this is where we do data prep, data blending with third-party data sources. And this is where we build our predictive models. And I will come back to that in the next slide. Obviously, the vast majority of our end users are accessing more descriptive and diagnostic reporting. And that is done through our web portal that has various different presentation layers that they can consume. And this is where, for instance, we're looking at the KPIs. Now, going further, we have, and zooming in a bit on the analytic and the predictive platform that we're using, I mentioned algorithms and predictive models become more and more important over time. And it's super important that we keep those in control, that we govern them in order to safeguard our intangible assets and to develop them further as we go along. It's also a scalable ingredient in here. So if we are, as we are keeping all our algorithms in a repository, then we can reuse them, obviously, and they can be reused for different use cases. So if you are an analyst or a power user, you, depending on what problem you're trying to solve, if you're doing an investment transaction in country A, it obviously differs to an investment transaction in country B. And for that, you might need to use different algorithms because the data quality is different, the investment structure looks different, or if you're doing a scorecard for collections in one of your operational houses. So basically, we build a workflow, you use the user controls that you have access to, that you deem necessary, and you analyze. And one of the most important aspects of this is that we need to have ease of use so we can iterate and analyze the results quickly. Because that way we learn to fail fast, because it's a tricky business. You try some assumptions, you need to get the result quickly. And you redo, and this is then iterative process. And then you share with the end users. Now, I just want to leave you last but not least, with the fact that Gartner predicts that by 2020, 75% of large and mid-sized organizations will compete using predictive algorithms. So you better keep those in control and ensure that they are not sitting on a local installation somewhere when the analyst leaves the house. Last but not least, I will leave you with what I think is the most important aspect. In the course of the next 10 to 15 years, the way we work will change more dramatically than it's done through the modern age. That change aspect is huge. Now, so when it comes to leading change, you need a culture. And at Hoist, I'm happy to say that we have a culture called trust that surrounds everything that we are doing. Because when it comes to leading change, the hard stuff is easy and the soft stuff is hard. So bear that in mind. Thank you.